Hi guys, I'm Girl Gone Bookish. I'm your Monday here on Bookish Friends. So this week's topic is Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm very excited to bring it to you this week. Edgar Allan Poe is one of my favorite writers who's a very interesting and misunderstood kind of guy. And he was also a really great author. He gave us a lot of really creepy, really good stories. He was an inspiration to a lot of future writers. So I'm just going to get started with my poem. I hope you enjoy this, and then I'm going to give you some other little facts about Edgar Allan Poe that I find interesting.
Gaily red light, a gallant knight, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long, singing a song in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and over his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, he said, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow, ride boldly, ride, the shadow replied, if you seek for El Dorado.
So when I first read this poem to myself, I really liked it, but then I wanted to Google what the meaning behind it was because I kind of knew what I thought it was about. I kind of felt that it was about, obviously this knight goes through his stages of life from, being a young man to being very old, searching for El Dorado. And to me, that just kind of meant, at the end, he's looking at facing his death. And I kind of feel like that's what the shade represented, the shadow. But it was kind of saying to me, don't spend your whole life chasing something that may not even exist. Go for it, but if it may not exist, then don't waste your whole life looking for it. When I looked up the meaning, El Dorado is a fabled town supposedly in South America or South Africa, I can't remember, apparently made of gold, and people still debate whether it actually exists or not. So I found that to be rather interesting. A lot of Edgar Allan Poe's poems and stories he talked about death a lot and things like that. And I think a lot of that had to do with the death of his wife. He lost her after only 10 years of marriage. And he said that a lot of people said that he was very much in love with his wife. She was his first cousin and she was 13 years old when they were married, but they were married for 10 years before she died. And a lot of people think it's kind of creepy that he married his first cousin who was only 13. However, back in the day, that is what they did. It was okay and perfectly acceptable to marry your first cousin, and girls at 13 years old were able to, for the most part, have babies, and that's kind of what marked you as being a woman, and you were then up for grabs to get married. And so yeah, it wasn't that odd of a thing to do. He was by no means a child molester. After her death many years later, he was engaged to another woman who was 40 years old, and he had many healthy relationships in his lifetime, and none of them were with anyone that young. So he was perfectly normal for his time period anyway. Also, people said that knew Edgar Allan Poe and his wife said that he was often seen playing in the front yard with her. Again, you gotta remember she was very young, and they would play leapfrog and chase each other around the front yard. And they said that one time he actually split his pants playing leapfrog, and his young wife couldn't stop giggling. I thought that was really cute. It makes him seem like a normal person. He also played with the neighborhood children. After The Raven was published, he actually got a little bit famous, and the kids in the neighborhood called him the Raven and would play with him, and he would jump out and scare them and things like that. So I just really like that sort of thing because we see Edgar Allan Poe as a dark, broody, depressed, on drugs, alcoholic kind of guy, and really he wasn't. He became a lot of those things later in life. He was very depressed towards the end of his life and drinking a lot. But for the most part, the physical image and the mental idea of Edgar Allan Poe was a lot different than what he actually was in life. I'm going to insert a picture probably somewhere in this area of the iconic picture that we see of Edgar Allan Poe, and then these next two pictures that I'm going to put up are photos that were done of him during his life in his younger years, and this is what most people who knew Edgar Allan Poe would expect him to look like. Definitely not what we're used to seeing, but this is what a friend of his or a relative would expect to see if he were to show up at your house. This is what he looked like. This is what was normal for him. We just have that iconic image, and that's what we think of, but it couldn't have been farther from what he was actually like in life. So I think that's really neat. Also, another kind of random fact that a lot of people don't know about is there has actually been a Poe toaster, and that's the unofficial nickname of this person. And every year for almost 80 years, I think it had gone on for several years before the first documented thing in the 50s. I think it had started in the 30s, but every year since the 30s to 2010, someone was seen in the graveyard toasting Edgar Allan Poe, and they left a bottle of expensive cognac and 3 roses, and it was very specific. The cognac was the same every year, and the roses were arranged a certain way every year, and they believe it was a father and son because of how many years passed. There's only one picture, which I'll put here, of the Poe toaster, and it was actually captured by Life magazine. But every year people stand at the gates of the cemetery, which is locked, and on his birthday, which is January 19th, like I said, and they wait to try to see the Poe toaster. In 2010, he stopped showing up, and he hasn't been back since. We assume it was a man, we don't know, but like I said, a lot of people speculate that it was a father and son, and that the son, once he took over, did it for a lot of years, must have fallen ill suddenly before he could pass the tradition on, or did not want to choose, or chose to not pass the tradition to his children, or whatever. Nobody really knows. It's a mystery, and I just think that's a really cool thing that happened. I would love to go and see his grave in Baltimore, Maryland. He is buried beside his wife and his mother, from what I just found that out. I didn't know that until today. So yeah, that is my video for Edgar Allan Poe Week. I hope you all have enjoyed. I hope you've learned something, and more importantly, go read something by Edgar Allan Poe. He's written a lot of great stuff. It may not be your cup of tea, but you know, it's worth just trying. You know, you might, if you haven't read anything by him, you may end up loving it. So the last thing I want to leave you with is a quote from Edgar Allan Poe, and that is simply, "All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream." Bye, guys.